The scorching midday sun of the Texas desert beat down mercilessly when Jake Morrison spotted something that made his blood boil with indignation. There, in the middle of nowhere, tied to an iron stake driven deep into the arid earth, was an adult wolf. But it was not just this sight alone that broke the experienced cowboy's heart. Beside the mother, a small and fragile pup whimpered desperately, trying in vain to nurse from its exhausted mother. The she-wolf, depleted by thirst and hunger, could barely lift her head. Her eyes, dulled by suffering, reflected an anguish that pierced straight through to the soul. The chains had left deep wounds on her neck, and dried blood stained her grayish fur. What kind of monster had done this? What heart of stone was capable of chaining a mother alongside her defenseless offspring, leaving them to die slowly under the merciless desert sun? Jake felt fury rising from the deepest part of his chest. His fists clenched tightly as he contemplated this scene of unnecessary cruelty that defied all sense of humanity and compassion. What you have just heard is only the beginning of an extraordinary story that defied all the laws of the Wild West. Jake Morrison, a solitary cowboy with a heart bigger than the Texas desert itself, was about to experience something that would change not only his life, but the way we understand the connection between man and nature. This is not a common story of cowboys and outlaws. It is the true account of an impossible encounter where compassion broke the barriers between the wild and the civilized. What will happen at the end of this story is something you have never heard before, something so incredible that when you share it with your friends, you will have to swear it is true. Jake Morrison had been riding for 3 consecutive days under the unforgiving Texas sun, searching for lost cattle from his ranch. He was a man weathered by years of hard work, with calloused hands and a heart that, despite the harshness of the West, retained a deep compassion for all living creatures. When he spotted the figures in the distance, at first he thought they were rocks or dry bushes scattered across the barren landscape, but something in his instinct told him to approach. His horse, a pinto mustang named Thunder, snorted uneasily as he caught the scent of wolves on the desert wind. Upon arriving beside them, Jake dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. The she-wolf looked at him with a mixture of fear and pleading that shattered his soul. She showed no aggression, only a deep resignation that spoke of days of unbearable suffering. The pup, barely a few weeks old, huddled against his mother, trembling not only from fear, but from extreme weakness. The chains were heavy, designed to hold a large animal securely. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. Jake examined the shackles closely. They were of good quality, impossible to break without the proper tools. "Easy there, girl," he murmured with a soft voice, keeping his hands visible and making no sudden movements. "I'm going to get you out of here." The she-wolf seemed to understand something in his tone because her eyes softened slightly, a flicker of hope appearing where there had been only despair. Jake knew he had to act quickly given the condition of both animals. They had been at least 2 days without water or food, perhaps longer. He returned to his horse and took his canteen from the saddlebag. With infinite care, he approached again and poured water into his hat, placing it near the she-wolf's muzzle. She drank desperately, and Jake had to ration the water carefully so she would not choke or make herself sick. Then he offered some to the pup, helping it drink with the tips of his fingers, gently coaxing the weakened creature to take the life-giving liquid. With the animals slightly rehydrated, Jake knew he needed to find a way to free them completely. His cowboy tools were not sufficient to cut through those thick chains. He mounted Thunder and began to explore the surroundings, searching for any clue about who had committed this atrocity. About 500 meters away, he found the tracks, boot prints from a man, horse hooves, and remains of a recent campfire. Whoever had chained the wolves had camped there the previous night. Jake followed the tracks northward toward the nearest town, Dusty Creek. His heart accelerated when he recognized the particular tracks of a horseshoe that had a distinctive mark, a small crack on the left side that created a unique pattern in the dust. He knew those marks well. They belonged to the horse of Silas Blackwood, an unscrupulous hunter who dedicated himself to capturing wild animals to sell them to rich collectors or traveling circuses. Blackwood was known throughout the territory for his cruelty. Jake had heard stories of how he tortured animals to break them, believing that suffering made them more obedient. The practice of chaining a mother with her offspring was typical of him. He used the pup as bait to keep the mother still and compliant. Jake returned to the wolves, his mind working at full speed. Dusty Creek was 2 hours away by horseback, but he could not leave the animals alone for that much more time. The sun was already beginning to descend, and the desert nights could be deadly for creatures so weakened. The temperature would drop dramatically, and in their current state they might not survive the cold. He made a risky decision. Using his rope, he created a lasso around the stake, tied the other end to his saddle, and commanded Thunder to pull with all his strength. The horse, trained for ranch work, put all his weight into the pull. The stake moved slightly, but did not come loose completely. Jake repeated the operation several times, each time with more force, adjusting the angle and having Thunder back up to get a running start. Finally, the stake came out of the ground with a dry, cracking sound that echoed across the desert. Now the wolves were free from the stake, but they still carried the heavy chains that restricted their movement. It was progress, but Jake knew he needed to get them to a safe place before Blackwood returned. The hunter was known for his violent temper and would not take kindly to finding his trap empty. Jake knew of a place, a natural cave half an hour away, where he had sheltered cattle during previous storms. It had a source of fresh water that trickled from a spring in the rocks, and it was hidden among the boulders and desert vegetation. It would be the perfect refuge, at least temporarily. Carrying the wolves would not be easy. The mother weighed at least 60 kilograms, weakened but still substantial. The pup was more manageable, but Jake knew that separating it from its mother could cause fatal stress to both. The maternal bond was strong, and in their weakened state, the emotional trauma could be as deadly as the physical suffering they had already endured. With infinite patience, Jake managed to get the she-wolf to walk alongside him, the chains dragging behind her, creating furrows in the sandy ground. Thunder followed behind, carrying the pup in an improvised sling that Jake had tied to his saddle using his bedroll and some rope. The little creature was too weak to walk the distance, and this arrangement allowed the mother to see her offspring was safe. The journey was slow and exhausting. Every few minutes they had to stop for the she-wolf to rest. Jake used these moments to give her more water and small pieces of dried meat from his supplies. He spoke to her constantly in low, soothing tones, telling her about his ranch, about the beautiful valleys where she could run free, about the streams full of fresh water and the forests teeming with game. Whether she understood his words or not, his voice seemed to calm her. When they finally reached the cave, the sun had already set, painting the desert sky in shades of purple and orange. Jake lit a small fire at the entrance, far enough away not to frighten the wolves, but close enough to provide them with warmth and light. The cave was spacious, with smooth walls carved by centuries of wind and water. The spring created a small pool of crystal-clear water at the back, and the sandy floor was soft enough for the exhausted animals to rest comfortably. The she-wolf curled up in a corner of the cave, and for the first time in days, the pup was able to nurse properly. Watching this scene of maternal love amid so much suffering made Jake feel a lump in his throat. The she-wolf's eyes never left her pup, and occasionally she would look up at Jake with what seemed like gratitude. But Jake knew his work had barely begun. Tomorrow he would have to face Silas Blackwood, and that man would not be happy to find his traps empty. Jake checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded and ready, then settled near the cave entrance. He positioned himself where he could see anyone approaching, while also keeping an eye on the wolves. That night, while standing guard, Jake felt something had changed within him. He was no longer just a cowboy looking for lost cattle. He had become the protector of two innocent lives that depended entirely on him. The weight of this responsibility settled on his shoulders, but instead of feeling burdened, he felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. Throughout the night, he heard the sounds of the desert coming alive. Coyotes howled in the distance, owls hooted from their perches, and small creatures scurried through the brush. Each sound made him more alert, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. But the wolves seemed to sense his protective presence and rested peacefully for the first time in days. Dawn arrived, with the sound of approaching hooves echoing off the canyon walls. Jake woke instantly, his hand moving toward his gun. Through the rocks, he saw Silas Blackwood riding toward the place where the trap had been, followed by two more men. Jake recognized them as the Coulter brothers, two fur trappers as despicable as Blackwood himself. They were known for their ruthlessness and their complete disregard for any form of law or decency. Blackwood was a bulky man with a black beard and small, cruel eyes that seemed to pierce through everything they looked at. His face was weathered and scarred, telling tales of countless fights and confrontations. When he reached the empty place where the wolves had been, his roar of fury echoed throughout the desert. Birds took flight from nearby cacti, and even thunder shifted nervously at the sound. "Someone freed my wolves!" he shouted, examining the tracks around the uprooted stake. "I invested 3 weeks capturing that female. She was going to bring me a fortune. Some bleeding heart is going to pay for this." His companions, the two fur trappers, began following the tracks that Jake had inevitably left. Despite his best efforts, the weight of the she-wolf and the dragging chains had created a clear trail in the sandy soil. Jake knew it was only a matter of time before they found the cave. The tracks were too obvious, and Blackwood was an experienced tracker. Inside the cave, the she-wolf had sensed the danger. She stood up, positioning herself protectively in front of her pup, despite the heavy chains she still carried. Her ears were pinned back, and a low growl rumbled in her throat. Her eyes met Jake's, and in them he saw something extraordinary: trust. After everything she had suffered at the hands of humans, this wild she-wolf was trusting him to protect her and her young. Jake took his rifle and positioned himself behind some rocks that offered cover toward the canyon entrance. He did not want violence, but he was prepared to defend the wolves if necessary. His position gave him a tactical advantage, but he was still outnumbered 3-1. Moreover, his real concern was not winning the fight, but ensuring the survival of the wolves. If shooting started, the wolves could be caught in the crossfire. "Morrison!" Blackwood shouted when he finally recognized the boot prints. "I know it was you. Come out and face the consequences of stealing my property. Those animals are legally mine." "Those animals are not anyone's property," Jake shouted in response, his voice carrying across the desert morning, "and especially not property of a sadist like you, who would leave them to die of thirst." The tension grew as Blackwood and his men approached closer to the cave. Jake could hear their horses' hooves on the rocky ground, getting nearer with each passing moment. He knew he had the advantage of position, but they had numbers. Plus, his true concern was not winning the fight, but ensuring the wolves survived this confrontation. "Blackwood," Jake called out, trying to buy time and perhaps find a peaceful solution. "I propose a deal. I will pay you what you were going to earn with those wolves, and you leave in peace. There is no need for bloodshed over this." The hunter's cruel laughter echoed off the canyon walls. "This is not about money, Morrison. This is about respect. Nobody interferes with Silas Blackwood and lives to tell about it. You have crossed a line, and now you are going to pay the price." At that moment, something unexpected happened that changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. The she-wolf, despite her chains and her weakness, managed to make her way out of the cave. She positioned herself next to Jake, staring at Blackwood with a ferocity that made the hunter's horses rear back nervously. The pup followed her, staying close to his mother, but also near Jake. It was as if the wolves had decided that Jake was part of their pack, and they would stand with him against this threat. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered one of Blackwood's men, his voice filled with awe. "Those animals are not worth this much trouble, Silas. Look at them. They are standing with him like he is one of their own." But Blackwood was blinded by fury and his wounded pride. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at the she-wolf. "If I cannot have her, nobody can. I will put her down right here and now." Jake did not hesitate. He stepped between the rifle and the she-wolf, his own weapon aimed at Blackwood's heart. "If you shoot these animals, you will have to kill me first. And I promise you, Blackwood, I will not go down without taking at least one of you with me." For a moment that seemed eternal, the two men looked at each other over the sights of their weapons. The desert wind whistled between the rocks, and the only sound was the heavy breathing of everyone present. The tension was so thick it could almost be touched, hanging in the air like an invisible weight pressing down on all of them. It was then that the she-wolf did something that nobody expected. She slowly approached Jake, brushed his leg with her head in a gesture of gratitude and protection, and then positioned herself in front of him, looking at Blackwood with fierce determination. Her chains clinked softly as she moved, but she stood proud and defiant, every inch the predator she was born to be. "I have never seen anything like this," murmured one of the hunters, lowering his weapon slightly. "It is as if that wolf is protecting the man. This is not natural, Silas. Maybe we should reconsider." The scene moved even the hardest men. One of Blackwood's companions slowly lowered his weapon completely. "Silas, maybe we should leave. This does not feel right. There is something happening here that is bigger than us. Those wolves, they have chosen him. Going against that, it feels like going against nature itself." But Blackwood was too proud to back down. His reputation was everything to him, and the thought of being bested by Jake Morrison and a pair of wolves was unbearable. "Those wolves are mine. I captured them legally in open territory. I have rights." "There is nothing legal about chaining a mother with her young to let them die of thirst," Jake responded firmly, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. "And you know it, Blackwood. What you did was not hunting, it was torture. And torture is not legal anywhere, not even out here in the territories." Jake then had an idea that might resolve the situation without bloodshed. Slowly, keeping his rifle aimed at Blackwood, he approached his mount and pulled out a leather bag from his saddlebags. The morning sun glinted off the coins inside as he opened it briefly to show its contents. "Here are 50 gold pieces," he said, throwing the bag at Blackwood's feet, where it landed with a heavy thud that spoke of its value. "It is more than you would have earned selling dying wolves to any circus or collector. Take it and leave. This does not have to end in blood." Blackwood's eyes gleamed as he saw the gold, but his pride was still wounded. The money was substantial, more than he would make in months of hunting. However, his companions had already decided. One of them dismounted, picked up the bag, hefted its weight and handed it to his boss. "Take the money, Silas. It is not worth dying for some wolves. We have been paid well for our trouble. Let us move on to easier prey." Blackwood pocketed the gold, but his gaze remained venomous. "This is not over, Morrison. Someday I will find you when you do not have wild animals protecting you, and when that day comes you will regret crossing me." "When that day comes," Jake responded calmly, never lowering his weapon, "I will be waiting for you. But for now, take your gold and leave. And if I hear of you torturing any more animals, we will have this conversation again, but it will not end with gold." The hunters mounted their horses and slowly rode away, their figures becoming smaller against the vast desert landscape. Jake maintained his position until they disappeared over the horizon, swallowed by the heat waves rising from the sand. Only then did he relax and turn toward the wolves. The she-wolf was watching him with those intelligent golden eyes, and the pup had ventured closer, sniffing at Jake's boots with curiosity. The immediate danger had passed, but Jake still had the problem of the chains to solve. He knew that in Dusty Creek lived a blacksmith who could help him, but first he had to gain the she-wolf's complete trust to allow a stranger near her with tools. Over the next 3 days, Jake remained in the cave with the wolves. He shared his food, his water, and his warmth during the cold desert nights. The temperature would plummet after sunset, and Jake would keep the fire going, creating a warm sanctuary in the cave. Gradually, the she-wolf began to allow him to come closer. She would let him examine her wounds, though she would tense when he touched the chains. Even the pup began playing near him, losing the initial fear and showing the playful nature that all young creatures possess. Jake used this time to clean the she-wolf's wounds as best he could with what he had. He boiled water from the spring and used strips of his spare shirt to clean the infected areas around her neck. The she-wolf would flinch, but never showed aggression, seeming to understand that he was trying to help. He spoke to them constantly, his voice becoming a familiar comfort to the wolves. On the morning of the 4th day, Jake knew he had to act soon. The chains were causing severe infections in the she-wolf's neck, and she needed medical attention beyond what he could provide in a cave. The wounds were beginning to smell of rot, and Jake feared that without proper treatment, blood poisoning would set in. He made the decision to take her to town, risking the reaction of the inhabitants who might not understand his connection with these wild creatures. He spent that morning preparing for the journey. He fashioned a more comfortable sling for the pup, padding it with grass and his spare blanket. For the she-wolf, he created a cushion of fabric where the chains rubbed against her neck, trying to minimize the pain during the walk. He filled every container he had with water and gathered enough food for the journey. The trip to Dusty Creek was slow but revealing. The she-wolf walked alongside Thunder as if she were part of the caravan, her head held high despite the weight of the chains. The pup traveled comfortably in the saddlebags, occasionally poking his head out to observe the changing landscape. As they traveled, Jake noticed how the she-wolf would sometimes scout ahead, then return to his side, as if she was protecting him in return for his protection of her. The inhabitants of Dusty Creek stood slack-jawed as the famous cowboy Jake Morrison entered town with 2 wolves as if they were domesticated dogs. Children ran to tell their parents, women peered from behind curtains, and men stepped out of the saloon to witness this unprecedented sight. Jake kept his eyes forward, his jaw set with determination, leading his unusual companions down the main street toward the blacksmith shop. The blacksmith, an older man named Samuel with arms like tree trunks from years of working iron, at first refused to help. His face was creased with concern as he looked at the wolves. "Jake, those are wild animals. It is dangerous. What if they attack while I am working on them? I have a family to think about." But when Jake told him the complete story, describing in detail the cruelty of Blackwood and the suffering of the innocent creatures, the blacksmith's eyes moistened. He was a man who had seen much in his years, but cruelty to the helpless always affected him deeply. "That damned Blackwood. I always knew he was a bad person. My grandfather taught me that a man who is cruel to animals will eventually be cruel to people too." Samuel studied the chains carefully, running his experienced hands along their length. "These are quality chains, made to hold, but I have the tools to cut them. It will take patience and care not to hurt the wolf while I work." With extreme care and special tools that he usually reserved for the most delicate work, Samuel managed to cut the chains without further injuring the she-wolf. Jake held her head gently, whispering constantly to keep her calm, while the blacksmith worked. The she-wolf trembled but remained still, her trust in Jake absolute. The pup watched from a safe distance, whimpering occasionally when his mother showed signs of distress. The moment when the heavy chains fell to the ground was magical. The metallic clank as they hit the floor seemed to echo through the entire shop. The she-wolf stretched completely for the first time in weeks, her muscles rippling under her coat. She shook herself from head to tail as if throwing off not just the physical weight, but the memory of captivity. She approached Jake, and to everyone's amazement, licked his hand gently, her rough tongue a gesture of pure gratitude. "I have never seen anything like this," murmured the town doctor, who had come to treat the wounds on the she-wolf's neck. He had arrived skeptical, but was now working carefully to clean and dress the injuries. "It is as if she understands that you saved her. These wounds are serious, but with proper care she should heal completely. The infection has not spread to the blood yet, thank goodness." The doctor worked for over an hour, cleaning each wound thoroughly, applying healing salves and bandaging what he could. The she-wolf bore it all with remarkable patience, occasionally looking to Jake for reassurance. The pup had curled up against his mother's side, providing comfort with his small presence. Word of Jake's rescue had spread through the town, and a small crowd had gathered outside the blacksmith shop. Some were fearful, warning of the dangers of wild animals. Others were moved by the story of compassion and bravery. The town sheriff, a fair-minded man named Thomas Wade, pushed through the crowd to speak with Jake. "Jake, what you have done is admirable, but you know you cannot keep wild wolves in town. What is your plan?" Jake had been thinking about this moment since he first freed the wolves. He could keep them, try to domesticate them, treat them as pets. But he knew that would not be fair to them. The wolves belonged to nature, free to live as they had been born to live. They deserved to run under the moon, to hunt their natural prey, to raise their young in the wild places where their kind had lived for thousands of years. "I know of a place," Jake told the sheriff. "Up in the northern mountains, there is a wolf pack that ranges through the valleys. These two could join them, live as they were meant to live. I will take them there tomorrow." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "That seems right. But Jake, be careful. Blackwood will not forget this slight. He is a vengeful man." That night, Jake stayed in the town's small inn, and to everyone's surprise, the wolves stayed with him. The innkeeper was nervous but could not refuse Jake Morrison, who was respected throughout the territory. The she-wolf and her pup slept by the fireplace, looking for all the world like large dogs. Jake sat in a chair nearby, keeping watch and thinking about the journey ahead. At dawn the next day, Jake saddled Thunder and prepared for the journey to the mountains. The townspeople gathered to see them off, many bringing offerings of food for the wolves. Children waved goodbye, and more than a few adults wiped tears from their eyes as they watched the strange procession leave town. The she-wolf walked proudly beside Thunder, her head high, her wounds bandaged but healing. The pup, stronger now after days of proper nutrition, trotted alongside his mother, occasionally breaking into playful runs before circling back. The journey to the mountains took 2 days. As they climbed higher, the desert gave way to scrubland, then to pine forests. The air grew cooler and sweeter with the scent of evergreens. Jake could see the she-wolf becoming more alert, more alive, as they entered her natural habitat. Her ears perked at every sound, and her nose tested the wind constantly. On the evening of the second day, they heard it, the haunting call of a wolf pack in the distance. The she-wolf froze, her entire body tense with attention. The pup pressed against her, unsure of these new sounds. Jake knew this was the moment of truth. He dismounted Thunder and knelt beside the she-wolf, running his hand through her fur one last time. "This is where you belong, girl," he said softly. "Your kind is calling. Take your pup and live free. Live wild. Live as you were born to live." The she-wolf looked at him for a long moment, and Jake swore he saw understanding in those golden eyes. She pressed her head against his chest briefly, then turned toward the mountains. The pup followed, looking back once at the man who had saved them. They took a few steps, then stopped, looking back at Jake as if asking permission to leave. "Go on," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "Go home." The she-wolf tilted her head back and howled, a long, mournful sound that seemed to carry all her gratitude and farewell. The pup joined in with his smaller voice, creating a harmony that echoed through the valleys. From the distance, answering howls rose to meet them, welcoming them home. Then, with a final look at Jake, they loped into the forest, their forms quickly disappearing among the shadows of the pines. Jake stood there for a long time, listening as the howls grew more distant. He mounted Thunder and began the long journey back to his ranch, but he knew something had changed forever in his heart. He had learned that compassion has no boundaries between species, and that sometimes the bravest act you can do is simply be kind when the world expects cruelty. Months later, cowboys in the region began reporting sightings of a gray she-wolf that did not flee when she saw humans from afar. Some said she even seemed to protect lost travelers in the wilderness, guiding them to water or shelter. Others spoke of a wolf pack that would not attack cattle, as if they had made a pact with the ranchers. Jake smiled every time he heard these stories, knowing in his heart that his friend had found the perfect way to return the kindness she had received. Years passed, and Jake never saw the she-wolf again, but on quiet nights at his ranch, when the moon was full and the wind carried sounds from the mountains, he would sometimes hear a familiar howl. And always, he would step outside and howl back, a human voice joining the ancient song of the wild, bridging two worlds with the simple power of compassion. And so the story of the cowboy and the chained wolf became legend in the American West, reminding everyone that in the wildest heart can be found the purest gratitude, and that one act of compassion can change not just one life, but the entire world. The tale spread from campfire to campfire, saloon to saloon, growing with each telling but always maintaining its core truth, that kindness transcends species, and that the bonds forged through compassion are stronger than any chain.